Hi, Matteo. How are you? You've joined. I think there's only you and me in the meeting room so far. So it's myself, and yeah, we're going to be waiting for everyone else to be joining. You're welcome to.
Okay, ma'am.
Hi, you unmuted yourself. Great. And we have Tony joining us as well. How was your class? Did you have the game design class earlier?
I haven't, ma'am.
Did you have it? Sorry,
I haven't.
Oh, you haven't. Okay. And Tony, you're joining us. Where are you joining us from, Tony?
Sorry, it's my husband's phone. I didn't change the name. No
Hi
problem. It's Cecilia and Nathan's mom.
Hi
He's just
there.
on another Skype call.
So is Nathan going to be joining after the game design class is finished? Hey?
I wasn't sure who is it for. Is it for adults or parents or for the kids?
It's for whoever, really. I mean, we're going to be talking about the game development industry and how you develop a career in it. So I thought it's probably going to be more appropriate for the kids because they're kind of looking at joining the game development industry, but it can be for anyone really. Hi, Keegan. Welcome, Keegan.
Hi, ma'am.
How are you doing? You're joining us from one of our programming classes, right? You do programming with, is it with SPOO?
Hi, yeah. Yes.
Excellent. Well, welcome. Lovely to have you here. I'm still waiting for
Thank you
Brent.
for having me.
I'm still waiting for Brent to join. He has messaged me to say he'll be there in 3 minutes. So that's, yeah, I think we're only going to officially start at 4:30. But while we're waiting for everyone, let me hear what you guys, where you are all from. Are you all sitting in Joburg?
I am, ma'am.
Fabulous. Why don't we practice? I'm sure you guys have all used to using the chat feature, but maybe let me ask you a question around, thanks, Keegan. Keegan knows how to use the yes, no features as well. That's fabulous. I just wanted to make sure that you guys are all comfortable using the chat feature because when Brent comes online, I'm going to be asking everyone to mute yourselves, which you've already done. Thanks, Matteo. And we'll be asking you guys to use the chat feature to give any questions, just because you know how it goes when there's some noise in the background. It can be quite disturbing for the rest of the participants. So I'm sorry that I'm going to have to do that. So let me ask you guys a question. Why are you interested in game development? And if you could answer it on the chat feature. And let's see how the chat feature is how everyone is going to be responding on there. So let's start with you, Keegan. Tell us on the chat feature why you're interested in game design or game development, and we'll be explaining the difference between the two. Hello. Okay, so Keegan it has a feature to it, it's just going to develop and become more popular. Yeah, I mean, right now in South Africa, the game development industry, not just for games, you know, in the traditional sense of games, but also in the sense of training, you know, corporate training and stuff right now, like it's all becoming more gamified. So when you read that stat of, you know, in the South African industry, game development is growing so fast, 75%, I think it is. That's not just gaming in the traditional sense how we think about it, but it's also in, you know, training and corporate training, and a lot of that is starting to be more and more gamified. I do see that we've got Brent has joined us. So Brent, I think I've asked you to switch your camera on, and also if you could unmute yourself, because both of those things you need to control. And then let's see your face.
You should see my camera already, yeah?
There we go, yes.
Oh, okay, all right, right on.
Fabulous. So we're just going to wait a little bit because we've got a lot more people that we're expecting. There's about 40, 50 people that we're expecting to join today. And Brent is joining us. Brent, tell us a little bit about where you're sitting right now.
Like where in the world, or
where
physically in my house? I am over in just outside of Montreal, Canada. So you know where that is, because that's where we met a long time ago. And it is 10:25 in the morning over here.
10:25, yeah. For us, it's almost the end of the day.
Yeah.
And while we were waiting for people, I was asking some of them the question, and we've mostly got kids on the line, actually, if I look at the, because Brent, we run a few different programs. So we've got one right now running with kids are actually learning to design a game from scratch.
Okay.
Using the Unreal platform, which I'm sure we'll be talking a little bit more about. But but then we've also got quite a number of the kids that are doing our programming courses online with us as well. So it's kind of a nice mix of people, and the kinds of questions that we'll be asking will be, you know, both a little bit on the coding side as well, but focusing mostly on game. And just so that everyone is aware, I haven't introduced myself. Most of you hopefully know me, but my name is Joanne Frank, and I'm the MD at Brighter Futures. We are going to have some of our tutors join us as well as we go along, but some of them are actually running, the game design class is running right now. So they're going to be joining from that class and then coming and hopping onto the Zoom call. So those guys will be a little bit late, and I think we should start without them. But what I am hoping to be able to do, guys, and you must tell me if this suits you, is I've prepared a few little questions that I want to ask Brent, just because I know a little bit about what Brent has done. Brent and I are actually friends. He's a very good mate of my husband's. And so I wanted to prepare a few questions that I think would help guide the conversation, knowing what you guys want to know. But then I want to open it to the floor where, depending on how many people we do have on the call, we can either do it on the chat feature, where you just type your questions and I'll kind of read them out as we've got time to do that. Or depending on if there's only fewer people than we expect, then maybe we can just go to actual video and you guys can unmute yourselves and ask the questions. So Brent, tell us a little bit more about you and your career journey to date.
Okay. So in the beginning, well, I think that the most obvious place to start is how I kind of got, like, what's the full vector and what trajectory I took to get here. I think that honestly, I probably ended up in games because I really like games, I think, is the honest truth. I still have funny memories of my mom and dad getting irritated that I played so many games when I was younger. And then when I had a career in games, they kind of had to humbly come over and tell me that, like, I guess, you know, we're kind of sorry. They kind of busted your chops all the time about playing the games because clearly it led somewhere, which is great. And it's funny though, because I kind of let them off the hook because I said, well, probably I would say that on the law of averages would probably state that most parents would be right to tell their kids to kind of calm down a little bit, because not everyone, gets a job in games, obviously. But luckily enough, I actually got into animation was my chosen field for just career-wise, and I didn't start in games. I started in film and television, and I worked there for quite a few years first. And but something in me still wanted me to find a way to get into games, and eventually I found an opening at a company in Toronto. And that was my first game job, and I've kind of been mostly game oriented since. I've dabbled in the other industries from time to time, but I think that the game industry is the one that really has a hold over me, and I honestly believe it's because it really does exercise both sides of my brain. I think it's interesting because it's very technical, but it's also very creative, and I love that because it really satisfies me. Both needs, but it quenches the thirst on both sides of my brain, I think. So
Yeah, and what I find so amazing is that, as a parent myself now, I've got young kids, as you do too, we're constantly telling our kids to get off the screens and,
yeah.
not take some, worried about overly doing the screen time. Yet your screen time, and you had the same battle with your parents.
Yeah.
And I'm sure many of the kids that are on the line with us today, like they've also experienced that same thing
sure.
of like mom's screaming at you in the background saying, get off, you've had enough screen time.
Well, even more so because back when I was a kid, we didn't have mobile phones like we have today, obviously, right? Like not to date myself too badly, but cell phones were certainly not a thing when I was a kid. So that does change things quite a bit. So yeah, I would imagine the people in this room, if depending on their age, I would imagine that being quite more of a real thing in their lives. I would, for sure.
So I think what makes that really exciting for the kids on the line is just to see how this can actually be a career. And, what started out with Brent just wanting to play games has really led into a phenomenal career. And Brent, tell us a little bit more about the game development industry in North America, because we feel a little bit isolated all the way on this side of the world. So tell us a little bit about what it looks like. Some of the other questions that we've got from a lot of the learners is when you answer your question, what is the difference between game development and game design? Because that kind of comes up quite a lot as well. So kind of paint us a picture of what the game development industry looks like in North America these days.
Well, I'd say it's pretty healthy, generally speaking. Obviously, COVID-19 has certainly wreaked havoc here as it has wreaked havoc everywhere. But luckily, we are in an industry that survives storms like this typically, because when times are a little bit troubling, then what do people typically want to do with their time? Usually it's film, like people want to go to the movies, they want to escape. So, but because people are mostly trying to stay at home whenever possible, video games are like the obvious thing that people can sort of pour themselves into. So video game production and development has seen a bit of a boon, although it's still cautious because people don't know how long this thing's going to last. And so it's a little interesting right now, but that being said, it's still pretty healthy, I would say. And the only interesting notable change is that everyone's working from home. So not to my knowledge, there's no major game studio in North America that's actually working from their office yet. They're all pretty much set up to be able to work remotely. I happen to be lucky enough to live in what I would consider one of the meccas of the video game industry in North America, because Montreal has a really, really healthy showing of a good mix of independent game development studios all the way through to very, very, very large. Google recently even opened up a studio here to make native Stadia games, and that was like, when that happened, people were really like, holy cow, like it's crazy, like everybody's going to show up in town at some point. I think, obviously there are a bunch of other really big cities that host a lot of games. I think obviously any city. So Seattle, I think, probably Washington in the United States, that's a really big one. That's where Valve is. There's a bunch of pretty big. I don't know the whole list, but it's obviously pretty big. Anywhere like California in general, there's studios everywhere. those are the big ones. And then there used to be a decent number in Vancouver, but that seems to have died off. It's mostly just film, I think, these days. So I'd say that we're in the top 5 for sure. Montreal, it's pretty big.
And tell me a little bit more about I mean, paint us a picture. You know, none of us have worked in a gaming company. So
Yeah.
tell us a little bit more about what it is to develop a game.
Oh,
Like,
right. Yeah,
what
I
are the
forgot that part.
different roles that you need?
Yeah.
And yeah, paint us a picture of the
Sure.
processes that you've taken to develop games yourself.
Well, it's interesting. One of the question you asked earlier, I forgot to combine it with that answer. But the difference between game design and game development. So, you know, it really, it's kind of a tricky question to answer because I could answer it so many different ways. But let's start with just try to answer the question: the difference between design and development. Game development is just the bigger picture, right? And the bigger picture will look very different depending on the type of team you're on. For instance, I am currently doing some contract work for a company here in Montreal called 𝐼DOS. I used to work full-time over there, and they are experimenting with completely shaking up what that development team looks like. They're trying to go for a smaller team size, and this is not novel because this is something that a lot of studios have done in the past, but it hadn't been mainstream. A good example of a small team that produced really beautiful things would probably be Ninja Theory, and they are in the UK. Always forget what city they're in, but they produced the game Hellblade. I don't know if you're aware of that one, but it's a very high level of it's a very beautiful game. It's quite nice, and they did it with a really small team size. I think it's something ridiculous, like under 30 or something crazy like that, which is unheard of because AAA games, and AAA really just usually is a term we denote for games that are expected to sell a certain sort of dollar figure. So AAA is usually the big budget games. It's the one that the ones that usually. Yeah, the big blockbusters, the ones that everyone's going to rush out and buy typically, hopefully for the developer's sake. But those games, like a Ubisoft AAA game, the number of people that are actually contributing to those games are cracking, in some cases, over 1,000 people. And not all at the same time, but like, you know, it's what ends up happening is they end up with other studios and other teams helping and assisting, like some of the bigger games like Assassin's Creed franchise. They end up with really big teams. The core team being for sure hundreds of people. So you know, it really depends on how big the team is and what the project is that determines what game development looks like and what roles are on it. Game design is always going to be a role as far as I'm concerned, and that typically is in a bigger company. It's a very specialized role where the game designers are really in charge of breaking down systems into like essentially why it's going to be fun. You know, what is the meta part of the game? What's the core gameplay loop? Like what's the player typically doing most of the time in the game? These are things that the designers have to figure out, and they design these big game design documents. They're often called GDDs, and they get translated into actual actionable items by producers and team leads, and typically the engineers have to implement them. Smaller teams don't necessarily have that specialized role. What ends up happening is everyone acts kind of like a designer in a way, right? Everyone's an honorary designer, but what they're doing is they're bringing pure trades to the market, to the party. So some like animation, for instance, I couldn't really get away with working in a small independent game company and just think like an animator. Oh, just tell me what to animate, I'll animate it. Okay, good. It'll be more like, this is what we're trying to build. Okay, Brent, we need you to like literally conceptualize this whole feature of the game and get the animation done. Okay, go. It ends up being a bit more generalized and democratized over the entire team, who actually is doing what and who's making the decisions. I don't know if does that help? Does that kind of help answer the question, sort of, or?
Well, I think for me, in my mind, I'm sort of picturing that there's someone that has to almost think about the overall story.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Someone's got to think about, so almost thinking about what are the different pieces.
Yeah, okay. I could go over the main system. So at the very top, there is usually a producer and a game. Well, this depends too, depending on the size of the team. But sometimes there's a creative director and a game director. Sometimes there's just one person, and they're either a game director or a creative director. It doesn't really matter at that point, because if there's only one of them, they're probably doing both of those jobs. Back to what I was saying before, sometimes things get kind of combined under one mind. That person is in charge of the big, the creative / game director is in charge of the entire vision of the game. What is this game like? What market is this game for? Like, who's our fictional player? Who would want to play this game at all, and why? And what are the big pictures? What's the art direction, more or less, and like what's the overall sort of story arc, and why is it, what are the big features of the game? Like, why is it going to be a fun experience to play? The producer's job is to work hand in hand, not unlike a film, where the essentially the director of the film works with the producer to essentially establish not only what the game is, but like what is it going to take to make it? Like, what's the budget going to be? Where are they going to find the money to do it? Because even if you're a big game company, typically that money still has to gets allocated from somewhere. So usually there's a pitch process that goes into essentially starting the whole process, and that either is pitching to an editorial board if you're in a big enough company that can self-publish, or it might be pitching to a external publisher. So there's a lot of game studios that are still just developers that are not also publishing, and there's some companies that are just specialized only in just publishing games. Sometimes they actually, under one big roof, they have two different divisions. A good example of that would be Gearbox. There's Gearbox Software and there's Gearbox Publishing. Gearbox, of course, are the people who publish Fortnite, the Epic developed game. So so that's at the very top, and then down, as you go down, there's usually a set of directors. And I'm just going to speak about big companies, because you can just imagine that there's not going to be as many of these roles, because they would be combined if you're smaller. But if you're in a big company, it'll be like underneath that layer of game direction and it's this sort of splits, right? There's the producer line, and underneath producers, there's like an executive producer at the top, then there's producers, then there's associate producers, then there's like, sometimes production managers and coordinators. That's like the framework of support to keep the ball rolling and moving forward and unblock the creative side of the team. The creative side of the team is like game direction, creative direction. Then underneath that, there's like art director, animation director, like myself. There is audio director. There's often a presentation director. There is there's a level design director sometimes, depending on whether they need one or not. Sometimes that's just the lead game designer. Then there's like there's the whole game design department that usually has a lead. Depending how big that is, it might be multiple leads. And then there's the animation department, where there's sometimes leads. Like, leads are essentially senior level people on the team that people like myself can delegate to, so that I don't have to worry about the picture, the grand vision, and trying to make sure that everyone has work every day. There's someone who can help with those kind of tasks as well. So it sort of branches out. Like, there's so many different small areas.
Crazy. Like, there's so much involved, and also
it's monstrous.
exciting, I think, for the guys listening in, is just the sense of how big the opportunities are, how many people there are that it takes to build a game. I mean,
it's nuts.
So it's almost like if you're more on the creative side, there's opportunities. If you're more on the strategic side or the programming side, there's more opportunities.
Yeah.
I want to ask you though, Brent, for the guys listening in, everyone is young, as I was saying at the beginning. Starting out in their thinking about their careers. What would you give as advice around the steps that you need to take if you're wanting to go into the game development industry? Like, how would you kind of advise? And I'm sure there's not one route, but what are the kind of key skills that you think everyone listening in needs to start thinking about developing?
Well, I mean, I think, and by the way, I don't know why I left out probably one of the most meaningful and most important roles of making a game when I was given that list. But obviously, there's a whole department of engineers as well, right? So I think what it comes down to is, you need to be realistic with understanding what it takes to make a game. I think that is the biggest key. I meet a lot of people in my life who are like, oh man, I'd really like to make a game, or hey, I have a son who really wants to make a game, or is interested in games. Can you talk to them for me? I get a lot of that, right? And when I end up talking to the people, they really have no idea. They just like playing games. I think there's a big shift mentally that people need to take between you know, play. If you really want a job in games, you need to understand what it means to make one. And there's so many ways of doing that. I think you can just by maybe watching a good number of making of videos. They're amply available online on YouTube, and just try to get a sense of it because I'll tell you a fun little anecdote. One of my first job interviews outside of school, interestingly, was a game company. I didn't. It was one of the first things I wanted to do because, again, I was young. I just came out of school. I knew how to animate. At least I thought I did, and I thought, wouldn't it be cool if I could use that to get into a game job? And the interview went very badly. And the reason why it went really badly is because I sat down completely ill prepared because I liked games. I had a skill that I could lend to a game, but what I didn't know is how I would lend that to the game. So in the interview, there were a lot of questions about, do I have ever used 3D animation software before? Because back then it wasn't exactly an obvious thing. Because when I learned how to animate all by hand, there was no computer animation in my training in my first school. I did go back to school eventually to pick up those skills, but at the time, fresh out of my first college, yeah, no. Like I would have been in my very, very early 20s, and I had no idea. I'd opened a piece of 3D software before, but I didn't really know how to use it. And so a lot of the questions were technical, and I was sort of like, in my mind at the time, I remember thinking to myself, like, what? Come on, I know how to animate. Like that's all I need, right? And no, that's not all you need. You need to understand how to be able to apply that somehow to a game, and because it made them nervous. I've seen a lot of people come to companies that don't necessarily have an understanding of how to make a game. They're just looking for a paycheck, and they think that their skills will aid them in they think that the game industry is just another market that they can make money off of as a career because they have these skills. But they don't. Most of those people don't make it. And it's because they didn't really know. They like animating, for instance, but they were not aware that animating for a game is so much different than animating for like a film or a television. So I think that's my first thing is find out. Sorry.
How would you suggest people finding that out? You said there's a YouTube channel.
Yeah, well, no, just YouTube, like in general, just type in like your favorite game making of, or just making of a game, and you're gonna find all these making of, and it's gonna give you a bit more perspective on kind of what it takes. But I mean, obviously, I only really understand it from my perspective. Well, I have probably a more broader understanding, but from other departments and other trades as well. But obviously, my strongest understanding is from the animation perspective. And what I always tell animators that want to learn this, and I think the advice would be applicable to just about any other trade, is take the time to learn a game engine. If you really want to know what making a game is all about, then start making your own little game. And it's really not that difficult. It really isn't. At least you could just set off on a journey to try to make that game, and it will force you to understand what it takes to make a game. And so that way you're going to be a lot better prepared for an interview, and maybe you won't even get to that. Maybe you don't like it. Like you need to accept the reality that it might be something that you just don't enjoy doing, because it is pretty technical. I try to get people that are very artistic to stop thinking like that. You cannot just be like, oh, I'm an animator or I'm an artist. No, you're a game developer. Number one, at the very top of your list of priorities, be a game developer that happens to know how to paint nice concepts, or that happens to know how to make animations, or happens to do whatever. That you need to think like that first. And so you need to pick up at least the broad strokes of what it takes to make a game. And these days, with game engines being so accessible, there's no excuse to not to.
What's the top game engine you would recommend people to start making their games?
I used to say Unity or Unreal, but I've been saying Unreal instead these days, because if you're, I think it really depends on your background. If you are an engineer, then you can't go wrong either way, as far as I'm concerned, because the engineers, at the end of the day, are the ones that make it all go, right? If they are the ones who are going to build the bridge and the interface of all the content, getting in the game, and actually doing the stuff that they're supposed to do. So engineers have they have a very, very because of what they do, and because they understand a programming language, they are able to interface with pretty much any game engine. That depending, I mean, C# is I believe the programming language of choice. And I think programmers would probably not even call that a programming language. They probably call it more of almost a scripting language. but they,
We call it a programming language on this side.
yeah. Oh, okay. Well, I mean, whatever. Like it's not C++, right? Is the reason why it's C# and it's differentiated from its much bigger and much more bloated bigger brother. But C# tends to be what you would be working in with Unity, and C++ is probably what you would be working in with you were interfacing with Unreal.
Brent, you don't need to be a coder to be able to be in game development.
No, and so that's what I was just that's what exactly what I was segueing into. So the Unity, there are going to be, if you're, say for instance you're a content creator, or you'd like to be one, and you like making models, or you'd like animating, and you want to try to learn how to make a game, like I was saying, you're like, okay, good advice, I'm going to go do that. Unity, you will probably run into some walls that you kind of need to at least know. You might have to do a little bit of research on the net, and you might have to write a few lines of code in order to make it go. Unreal 4, you could do it all without writing one line of code, for real. They really made sure that they removed that barrier. They created this whole concept called blueprinting in the game, and blueprinting is kind of like coding, really, but it's done visually through like logical blocks of essentially functions and like all these, like, it's, so you need to think like a programmer, which is really great because it is kind of like training you to think like a programmer. So if you ever wanted to then learn how to program, it would probably be a lot easier if you spent a lot of time mastering blueprinting in motion in Unreal 4. But essentially, you don't have to write any actual lines. You don't have to know the syntax of any kind of programming language. All you need to do is figure out like how to build logical, logically flowing, graphs, they call them, inside of blueprints.
Cool. And Brent, tell us about the coolest project that you've worked on. Like, I mean, probably something that everyone here would know. I mean, I know you worked on the Avatar game. That's in my world, that was the most well-known, but I'm sure the kids have got different things that they know and different games that they love. Tell me about one of the ones that stood out the most to you, and also tell us why it was so great working on it.
Well, I mean, that's a really tough one to answer because they're all good for different reasons. I like to think that the ones that I like the most tend to be the ones that I learn the most on. So like there's that part of my brain, but then there's the other part of my brain that's like the player inside me. Like, it was really cool to kind of fanboy on the game that I made. So I don't know, I would probably give you the top 3. And Batman is definitely on the list. While I was working at Warner Brothers here in Montreal, and I'd say probably Far Cry 3 would be on the list as well. And Avatar ends up it gets an honorable mention just because of the process of making that game and how we were constantly interfacing with James Cameron and his team. I thought that was pretty cool. Like, I mean, it's pretty weird to say that, it's to think that you're in the same room with Steven Spielberg and James Cameron looking at this game. It almost feels like unreal now looking back on it. That was cool for that reason. It was just like kind of the mixing and mingling with like this, like the elite of Hollywood while making the game was pretty cool. But on a just pure game making side, I'd say it would be a toss up between for sure, it'd be a toss up between probably Far Cry 3 and Batman. And I think that just because those games are fun, and I like playing those games. I think that one of my most fun experiences to date, most creatively satisfying experience to date, was when I was on Far Cry 3, and I was on a mission to go find, essentially I was on a casting mission to cast a role for, because most of those games at Ubisoft that are realistic looking, we tend to work in motion capture. So we're hiring actors and actresses to play these roles. We're going to capture them using motion capture technology. And so I went on a casting mission in Canada. I went to Vancouver, and I was in Montreal and in Toronto, and I was looking for somebody early on in that project to sort of just to start trying to figure things out narratively. And that's when I sort of discovered Michael Mando, and he ended up becoming Voss, essentially the face of Far Cry 3. And so that was really fun. I'll never forget the day that I discovered him in a casting agency here in Montreal. And I remember it's very rare for me to feel like quite uncomfortable in a cast. He made me feel uncomfortable because he had such a volatile sort of performance. Like, it really put me like really off. Like I was just like off in a good way. Like I felt
Because
like
so
almost
real,
nothing in my life. Yeah, he felt unhinged. Like I was like, is this an act or is he actually a little bit off? Like, do I need to call police or like what's happening? So, and he's actually, I ended up getting to know him quite well, and he's a very, very, very nice dude, very smart, and he actually has a pretty major role now on Better Call Saul, which is an offshoot television series by was it Terry Gilliam? Is that his name? Not Terry Gilliam. He's in it. I always forget that guy's name. Something Gilligan. Anyways, doesn't matter. The guy who the director, the creative director behind Breaking Bad. They ended up doing.
Yeah.
So yeah, so any great guy. So that was a really fun experience. Really, just working alongside someone like Michael Mando and crafting and trying to create that role. I never shipped the game, so I can't take credit for all the amazing cinematics that he did in that and all the stuff that was great in there. But crafting that character and stuff is still one of the most fondest memories I have of making a game.
Well, and I'm not sure if anyone online has got this question in their mind, but I'm going to ask it in case no one else is, in case everyone else is too shy to ask this. But how much do game developers make?
Ooh, that is a very good question. That is that's gonna be decided geographically, as so many things. Like for instance, game developers make decidedly more in Toronto even than Montreal, but that's something that's been true for a long time. There's always been a bit of a disparity between those two cities. There's many reasons for it. There's no point getting into that right now, but just to prove a point that you could literally just be in a neighboring city and you're going to see a difference in the market value. I only know the values here, so I can't really be able to give you any idea.
Give us a range in your locations.
So in Canadian dollars, I think that and again, it will depend on what kind of schooling you have and what your trade of choice is. Engineers will typically enjoy a much bigger starting salary right out of school than an artist will. That's for sure. And that's because most of the engineers getting jobs in the game industry out here are coming right out of university. So they have a bachelor's coming right out. So they've been in school longer, and it's also just much more difficult to find a very, very good programmer, I think, coming out of school than an artist. An artist usually has quite a bit more learning to do first. But that's just been tradition as well, I think. Usually these are engineers. Engineers should get paid engineer money. So they end up getting starting anywhere probably around, I would guess, somewhere probably in the mid to high 40,000 range, I would imagine, as a junior, maybe more. I'm not an engineer, so I don't know for sure. But an artist, sometimes it's quite a bit lower.
400,000 rand for those. The Canadian exchange is actually it's more like 12, 13 right now. So a little bit more than that. Okay, so starting at around there. And would you recommend? I'm going to ask you one more question, and then I'm going to load it up to the floor, actually, because we need to hear from you guys. But, what are the actual are there any qualifications that you would say are like the holy grail that really you need to get if you want to get into this industry? Or is it better to just go and develop a portfolio of games that kind of builds up your credibility?
I'd say there's maybe you could attack that two angles. One angle is, if you don't like games, you don't play games, you need to give yourself take a step back and ask yourself, are you sure you really want a game job? Nothing's more awkward in an interview when inevitably, traditionally, you will get asked at some point in that interview, so what do you play these days? And it's a very casual question, but make no mistake, that question is to try to know whether or not you fit into a game development studio. It would be weird. You would be definitely an outsider if you started at a game company and you really don't understand the pulp culture behind video games. You won't understand like literally most of the references being used in creative conversations, because people will be like, yeah, just like in The Last of Us, and everyone's like, yeah. You don't want to be the one person going, I have no idea what that even is. Like, you don't want to, because it would be like trying to get a game in film and having not ever watched any movies. It would be weird. It doesn't make any sense. So make sure that you are like, and if you're in like, if you, for some reason you're intrigued anyway, say you're an engineer, and you find yourself like, because it would be probably easy to get a job in the video game industry if you're a well-trained engineer. And I mean by engineer, when I keep saying engineer, I'm obviously talking about computer engineering. That then maybe make sure you start playing some games if you're not a really big gamer, just to arm yourself for that conversation, because yeah, it's going to come up. The other flip side would be, like the advice I give everybody, all the artists these days, is just to learn a game engine, because traditionally what would end up happening is what would be on your portfolio to get that job would just be like, look at my work, and what used to be something you would be physical then turned into CDs, and nowadays it's just all online. You go into the job interview and people will just go to the link that you sent them, and then they're looking at the stuff that you did. And that if you're a modeler and you make 3D models, and it's probably just this video cut to music of all these beautiful models you've made, to really impress people these days, if you can show them that stuff. Like I always tell animators that I'm teaching now, that like I want to go to a job interview where I'm interviewing somebody, that when I ask them to see their work, they don't just send me a link, or we don't just look at something on a television. They bring a laptop, they take it out of their bag, they push it across the table, and they're like, play the game, and they give me a joystick, and I'm like, really? I look at, and I open up the laptop, and I'm like, next thing you know, and I don't need to be playing a full-fledged game, but there's a difference between looking at a bunch of animation cycles that are like, oh, those look like nice animations, versus look at how these animations can feel in a game. Look at how I've put it all together, because there's so much more to the equation than just making an animation. And that is that to not only know that that person gets it, but is also already on the road of mastering that skill, the true skill, the real skill. Then I would be at the point where I would have a hard time letting them leave the room. I'd be like, can you just stay? I'll just start paying you right now, because you already have all the skills I need. I don't have to even worry about training you. You are good to go. Let's just start working. That day that actually happens, I'm still waiting for it. It still hasn't happened. So, but that would be a really good in. That would be a good way to really impress the hell out of somebody in a job interview. That's for sure.
So I'm hearing that the actual game is the most, I mean, the research that I've done, I think I was reading an article about all the different gaming companies and what they're saying you need to do. And most of them agree with you that having a portfolio of games is way more important than, all the qualifications and things that you can that you can pull together. Although, of course, the two together are even more powerful.
For sure.
So I'm going to open it up to the floor. Guys, let's hear from you. Ask any question. You can go into the chat box. I'm sure everyone online is, most of you are part of our classes, so you know where to find the chat feature. If you haven't used Zoom before, at the bottom of your screen, if you take your arrow and you just scroll it around, you'll see a whole bunch of icons. One of those icons is the chat feature. Tell us, so I'm hearing from Nduduzi, what was the first 3D animation software you first used?
There's a question from Quinlan too, but they sent it directly to me.
Okay.
Quinlan, I'll answer that question right after this one, if that's okay. So I didn't want you to be nervous thinking that your question just disappeared into the nebula. So what was the first 3D animation software you first used? Well, I'm older than you, so lots has changed over the years. What I learned on was on Maya. That's at the time it was owned by a company in Toronto called Alias Wavefront. It was like Maya 1.5. It was very, very early in the Maya career, but this is back in 2000. So this is quite a ways back when it was the Wild West.
All born in 2000.
Yeah. It was the Wild West of 3D software, where there were a bunch that were kind of being used. There was this huge rivalry between 3D Studio Max and Maya. And 3D Studio Max was the original winner because it was always running on Windows, and game development was typically being done on Windows. So it was just a natural pairing, where Maya and Softimage and all these other softwares were only running on /RIX. And /RIX was God, I can't. This is so weird. That's even a thing. But it was a type. It was a subset of Unix, much like Linux is. But it was made for a specific type of hardware called silicon graphics machines. And these machines were worth a very pretty penny back then. Like exceedingly expensive. Like it's not the kind of computer you would have at home. It was like tens of thousands of dollars for just the basic level workstation. So that was because that was all being used on film, and films had bigger budgets, so they could afford these machines and the software. Where 3 Studio Max was running on Windows. Eventually, Maya ported to Windows, and Softimage was forced to port to Windows when Microsoft bought them back in the day. And so then that would change the face of access to 3D software. But back then, I pretty much learned them all. There was like 3 Studio Max, there was Softimage, and there was Maya. The one that is definitely the only one, well, it's not fair. The main ones being used today are still 3D Studio Max, although that's much more rare, which is interesting seeing that they had the market cornered back in the day. But it's mostly Maya and or Motion Builder. Motion Builder is the software of choice when using motion capture. You could do it in Maya, but it's not as streamlined as in Motion Builder, in my opinion.
So guys, I'm seeing lots of queries, and we're going to get to all of your questions. Don't worry. Brent, he told me before this interview, he told me, "Don't worry, Joe. I have no problem talking."
No, I don't. I really don't. You just go ahead and ask. Don't be shy.
As we can all tell. So
yeah.
So Quinlan's question was a great one. I'm a big gamer. I want to make games, but I'm not a coder. So what are the career roles that you suggest for Quinlan, Brent?
So that's the first question he asked. I'm a big gamer and want to, okay. So, yeah, like what do you like doing? Like it's such a personal question. Like, do you like, are you artistic? Do you like making art? Like, is that something that you like, or are you a bit more technical? Like you said you're not a coder, so I'm assuming you're a bit more in the artistic department, but maybe not. Maybe you're more into audio. You know, there's audio design is huge, and I would say that audio design, which is typical to audio, unfortunately, because you don't see it, you hear it. I don't know why audio in film and television and video games tends to get relegated as sort of like the invisible hero when it's at least half of the experience. But audio in games, I think there's always a gigantic, there's huge developments happening right now, and I think we're going to see we're going to start seeing much more of a bigger emphasis on it, especially with VR and like all the crazy things you can do with like three-dimensional audio in a VR sort of setting. There's just so much pioneering to do, so that's a whole other area. So yeah, you'd have to ask yourself what interests you. Like, what would you imagine wanting to be doing and contributing towards in a game? Smaller companies, you don't have that big of a choice, because if you like lots of different things, you can't really choose. Well, then that's a pretty good path to take, to try to find a job at an independent game studio, because chances are you're going to be asked to do more than just one thing. Maybe making the character models, rigging them, and animating them is an example, as opposed to just animating. You know, so it really comes down to, it's a very personal choice. So you'd have to kind of give you a bit more insight as to the kind of things that get you up in the morning, the things that are really interesting for you, and what you would fantasize over, like when it comes to the process of making the game.
I liked Kyle's question. He's asking, what does an animator and graphics designer, 3D modeling and map creating earn? So it's back to the my question. Thank you, Kyle. It wasn't just me wanting to know about the rands and cents.
Yeah, no, for sure you're gonna want to know, because you know it's been again, if some of you are younger, God knows you have parents behind you also wanting to know, to make sure that you're not going to go and embark on some foolhardy mission to get a job in games and then end up being a starving artist. That is certainly not the case. The salaries have gone up substantially over the years because of the competition for resources. But again, it does really depend on your locale. I think some places are clearly paying more because there's more game companies in the area, therefore there's more competition. Market value is always, that's usually how it gets determined. That and just the basic sort of like currency in the area. So I think that the question was specifically graphic designer, 3D modeling and map creating. Well, so 3D modeling and map creating in games are really very different things, just FYI. The map creation, there's level designers. They're the ones designing the sort of the flow and the logic to a level, where there are modelers for sure. They're like environment modelers. They're the ones who usually then populate those levels with art. So they tend to work hand in hand, those two different people. But by the looks of things, you're really kind of thinking more the modeling aspect. And I don't know, like in my area, like depending on the size of the team, probably starting anywhere around 40, maybe 35, 40, maybe. I earlier had my numbers wrong. The engineers usually get a bump up beyond that. I think they probably start at around, I haven't even looked for the longest time, but if I were to guess, it's probably around the $50,000 Canadian range, I think, but I'm not a programmer, so I've never really looked into how much they get paid coming out of school. It probably comes down to what kind of schooling you have as well, where artists are usually a pretty big step behind that, but it's enough to make ends meet for sure, especially around here. You might still have a roommate for a while if you're just a junior, you just got into the game job, but that's always been the case. I find it, in these kind of careers, but it doesn't take maybe about 4 years and you start to get a bit more seniority. The chances are you will then probably leave that first job and go work at a different company, and then there's a whole renegotiation of your salary, and at that point you're going to be probably doing okay.
Yeah, no, I mean those numbers in our market sound pretty pretty good for a starting salary.
Yeah.
I love your question, because I had the same question that I want, and you phrased it exactly how I phrased it. If you could go back in time and give yourself one piece of advice for your journey of game development, what would it be, Brent?
Ooh.
The tough one, but
Yeah, so because the advice
one piece of advice, I don't think it's going to be possible.
Yeah,
You're going to have to give
no,
us more than one.
yeah, I think that I wouldn't give them I couldn't give myself the advice that I give people today, and that is go download Unreal and just start learning it, and start applying the trade that you've learned or are learning, whether that's animation or modeling or audio or whatever. Start learning how to apply that craft to a game, because that is just the best way. That would be the advice they give people today. So, but back then it wasn't as readily accessible, in my opinion. Game engines weren't like they are today. They were essentially things that were, I mean, that's not entirely true, but it just wasn't as accessible, like I said. And for sure, to really be able to use a game engine, you would need to either know a programmer or you would need to be a programmer. And so that would have been a lot more of a bigger feat. So I guess what I would be doing is tell people to start changing the way they look at games when they're playing them. Continue to play them and start thinking about like try to start reverse engineering them in your head a little bit. Like, it all takes is to not just play it and accept things as what they are, but to instead start breaking them down. Start looking at, oh, hey, look for patterns. How are they, like, you play a game that's got really cool, like, story and really good narrative sequences. Ask yourself, why do I like that so much? What are they doing that's different than this other game over here? What makes it different? How is it, why do I just love playing this one much more? Like, you compare a game like The Last of Us and or anything from Naughty Dog for that matter, like Uncharted. You take a look at their games, and the way they integrate the narrative into their games is very different than a lot of other games. Why? What is the difference? Because just that alone will start training your brain to think about how people like figuring out, just by examining and taking apart things. You will learn a lot by just doing that. And so that would be the thing I would probably be telling people, I would tell myself to do, is to start thinking about that, so I don't make an ass of myself at that, pardon my French, but yeah, I don't want to. Yeah, that interview was not a good one. It was very awkward, and I still to this day remember it vividly, and I always tell it as an anecdote. So I would want to be better prepared. No,
that's great. And Harshi's got a great question as well here around how the game development industry actually works. Do you work for one company, and do you kind of stay with that company for a while, or do you actually more freelance, and you work for a bunch of different companies at the same time, consulting to a few? Kind of talk us through how that looks in the game development industry.
Well, both exist, I tend to do a lot more freelancing these days, and I think it's because I have a lot of experience. So I think it's difficult to freelance when you don't, because you need kind of connections, you need a reputation to be able to like market yourself like that. Although most people starting out will typically work for a studio, and they will work there. I know people that start at Ubisoft and they're still at Ubisoft 20 plus years after that. And it's because Ubisoft's a big company with lots of different projects, so it keeps people interested, because there's a lot of horizontal mobility to try out different types of games. So if you like the culture of that company, then you're just going to stay, and because you get everything you would want. You get training, you get paid well, and like, why would you have a reason to leave? So it really comes down to your own personal preference and probably the amount of experience you have. I currently work, I do a bunch of freelance and I do a bunch of kind of more permanent work for studios. It really, sometimes I do, like my day right now is divided up on an online learning platform that I'm actually developing with a bunch of people. I do that. I also teach online. I also work for a company in Toronto remotely to help develop some ideas. I do that a couple days out of the week. It used to be every day of the week until COVID rolled into town, and then I ended up reducing my hours there and working somewhere else. And that's Get Set Games in Toronto. So that's my employer for like the 2 days of the week, and then the other 3 days I'm a kind of a for hire over at 𝐼DOS and helping out what they're doing over there as well. So you could have a colorful mosaic of things like I do later on in your careers probably, but most people are typically finding themselves at a company, staying there until the end of a project, because they might still be, because the one thing that might be at the heart of that question is, are there permanent jobs out there with benefits? Yes, there absolutely are, especially the bigger companies that will be offering you full-time employment. That's the standard here in North America, which is great because the film industry is definitely not like that. It used to be a bit more like that, but now across the board in North America, people are typically just hired for terms on projects. And so they finish that project, they go to the next company with the next studio, or they might stay, they might get reinvited and retained for the next project, but you never really know when you might need to leave and go to a different company. It all depends on how busy that company is. Exactly. So the game companies tend to be a bit more like hire people permanently, usually.
Yeah, and it's great to have the opportunity then, as you get more senior, to have a diverse variation of different projects, because that will keep, for someone like you, Brent, that will keep you interested. I'm sure working on the same thing day in and day out would be boring for you. And Sashin wants to know, what do you think the future of game development is? Where do you, and I'd like to add to that in terms of what are some of the innovations that you see coming in the new kind of tech space?
That's tough. What's interesting is that, what a lot of companies are trying to figure out now is how to make it sustainable. Because if you've noticed, games have been getting bigger, flashier, longer, but yet the price tag is relatively it hasn't moved a lot. It's they tick up every few years, maybe by another $5. But like, a brand new game typically these days is anywhere between $60 and $80 typically, depending on, and maybe beyond if you offer like one of those premium content sort of like founders packages or special editions where you get a bunch of other stuff. But it's usually around that range, a sweet spot being around $70. That is interesting considering how much bigger games are these days and how much more expensive they are to make. Every time a new game console comes out, it means that the game, like the player base becomes hungrier for more, because naturally it's a newer platform, so I want bigger and better graphics, and so it's becoming unsustainable. I'm not gonna lie. We're about to see probably a pretty big pivot on how to resolve that particular trajectory that just only ends poorly, because I can't imagine how we're going to be able to like make the games at the same price point but continue to make them, because it just means that people are putting more hours in, and it's going to break. So what we're starting to see now is people trying to find a way of cracking the code in a different way and offering different types of games experiences. That's why this idea of free to play is interesting, and it's taken a couple different, it's gone through a lot of evolutions, the free to play, because it all started with good intentions, but then some greedy companies started to overuse it, and then people are just like, okay, this is dumb because this game's not really free at all. It's just a catch. You're sucking me in, and I need to pay a lot of money all the time just to be able to continue to enjoy it. And so there's been backlash to that. So it's been reimagined a couple times. That's a whole market. This idea, this whole games as a service, they call it, which is games that a game comes out, but it's episodic. Like in a sense that it might be a game that's fun to play anyways, but they have seasons. Like these are usually very popular in multiplayer games. Like you see this in Overwatch, You see this in like League of Legends and Dota 2. You see this in like a lot of the sort of battle royale type games, like the Fortnite battle royale, Apex, and like this idea of refreshing it. And so people are often, there's microtransactions that keep that afloat, or sometimes you're even paying a subscription, like a massively online game like Warcraft. You have to pay monthly to get that access to that game. So it's there's the models are always changing in order to make it sustainable to make the game. And so I'm excited to see what comes next. But I know that there's going to be more massive changes in order to be able to make games at a price point that people can afford, but still continue to evolve and to grow and to become more impressive. I'm mostly excited by the VR space, because I think that it's been around long enough to safely assume that it's not a fad and it's not going away. It took me a long time myself to get into VR. I just bought my first headset only a couple months ago, which is weird for me because usually I'm like a very early adopter to those kind of technologies, and I don't even know what I was waiting for because it is so amazing. And as a developer, it really triggers my inner, like, it makes me think like, wow, like this changes everything, the things you could do inside here, because it just breaks all the standard rules of how you make a game and how a player experiences it. That seems fun. It feels like a very interesting space to explore and pioneer in. So who knows what the next evolution of that is going to look like. So I don't know. It's hard to know. It's hard to really predict these things because it could go in so many different directions. What's exciting is that I know it's going to change, and that's part of the fun, is that you have to adapt.
Adapt, exactly.
A really long answer to that question. I'm sorry.
No, that's awesome, and it helps everyone to get a sense of how the world is changing in game development. So
yeah, every day, every second of every day it changes.
And Kyle, I think Kyle, you've got another great question. So Kyle has a game idea, and but how would he go about building it if he couldn't do it by himself? How would he get to hold of game developers to help him build it and turn it into reality? What are there ways that you can do it at a small scale without being part of a big gaming company?
That's a tricky one. I think that you would probably need to, like, if you were really serious about it, you would have to, you'd have to learn what it takes to pitch a game. And so I would do a little research on pitching games. There's a lot of really great websites out there that have lots of good information. I found a good number of articles on sites like Gamasutra. You could go just do a Google search and just start reading up, because if that's what you want to do, then you have to learn how to do that one skill, which is to put together something that you could actually sell. And that there's a template, there's a format, there's something you're trying to figure out in order to be able to sell that. And any good article is going to give you advice on, you might think you have a good game idea, and I'm not saying that you do or don't, because I haven't heard the idea, but you need to prove to yourself by breaking it down into certain things. Like, for instance, do you already know for sure what that core gameplay loop is? Can you prove it out in a simple way? Can you prove it out with, like, can you make a prototype of that game that doesn't even require a game engine? Like, can you do it with, like, cutouts and paper? Like, can you do that? Can you make like a tabletop version of the game? Can you do it in some other software like Flash or some other more accessible software that you could sort of maybe make it feel interactive? If you can't do any of those things, then you have to get really good at explaining and describing. And yeah, I'm not going to get into it now, but there's lots of research you're going to need to do to understand. And then once you have that pitched, put together, you can actually go and find, then maybe reach out to people in the game industry. Like, there's a lot of independent studios that might want to hear about it. You might want to look in the general area. Maybe Joanne, maybe she can help with this, but I'm sure there are some incubators somewhere around the downtown areas. Incubators are a thing where typically they are financed by angel investors, or sometimes just like by people, like by divest, like just investment groups sometimes fund these things. They're essentially places that help people exactly like you, where they have a group of mentors and coaches, and they essentially can take you in and they help you develop that idea and help you then try to bring that idea to market by connecting you with other people that might have money, or people that, like, or maybe just tapping on directly on publishers' doors. So I would look into that if there's something around there.
There's no example out there, Brent, that has a small scale guy that just got his game to go viral, didn't need any investment for it.
Well, there is, but they have to learn how to make a game. I think part of the question was like, I don't know how to make a game, so how do I do it? So that would be yes, you could also just learn how to make the game. You could take my advice and download Unreal today and just start learning and put your money where your mouth is, right? Or like, cause you could do it. I'm telling you, you can. If you think you can't, you're wrong. You just have to make the decision to start. And I'm telling you, it is extremely exciting. It's deep, and to learn Unreal to be able to make a game is not going to be an overnight thing. It's going to take you time, but I'm promising you, if you put that time in, you will be able to achieve what you want to achieve. Maybe you're on a tighter deadline and you really want to get that game out there, but patience, my friend.
Or Kyle, join. I don't know if you are in our game design class, but you could join our game design class, and we'll fast track your learning on the Unreal Engine. I'm seeing our time is running out, so I'm not sure I can get to everyone's questions, but what I did want to just, because I see that some people are getting off, because I think I actually promised this to be a 45-minute call, and we're running a bit over time. But Brent, I just wanted to take a second to say thank you so much for taking your time. I mean, early in the morning on your Saturday, like, I know it's very important for you to have some downtime with your family. So really, thank you for making this time.
No problem.
Before I pause, and I don't know, Brent, if you've got to get going.
I'm fine. I can
stay a few more minutes.
I can definitely stay for a few minutes. No problem.
So Keegan had one more question. Do you work a certain amount of hours a day, or is there something like a deadline for a project when you get it done by a certain date? I think, Brent, you want to just answer that, and then
depends on the studio. Depends on the studio, and it depends on where. Like, if you're working a full-time job, then yeah, you're going to be working usually anywhere between 40 and 50 hours a week. Usually, 50 hours would definitely be an overtime situation, which studios try to avoid, but that would be like the average. But when you're shipping something or you're trying to make it be a deadline, people tend to put in a lot more extra hours, and companies have different ways of dealing with that. They'll either pay you overtime, or they're going to give you what's called banked hours, which is essentially time in lieu. So like, it'll be like, you'll just be essentially working extra time now for vacation afterwards. So that after the crunch, you could take like weeks off because you put weeks of extra time in, but maybe over the last several months to ship something. So, the number of hours really depends on the situation.
Cool. And Brent, you've been to South Africa, so everyone online is from South Africa. So tell us a little bit about what you loved most about South Africa before we end the call.
Well, it's hard to really pick one thing. As you know, I really love South Africa, and I've been there twice. I've been lucky enough to be there twice. Once for your wedding, and before that for work. And I think that was really, I think my first trip was the most. It blows my mind for two reasons. For one reason is because I tried to do as many things as I could while I was there by myself, and it was just fun to just adventure around South Africa, do everything from meeting up with you and Tim to go scuba diving. Was it just south of Mozambique there on the coast?
Yeah.
Oh man, that was just amazing. I tried to learn how to surf in where was that? It was in Umhlanga, I think. It was on my way up to meet you guys. That was fun. So on that, I did like the safari. I did all the things that you would ever dream about in a land that's full of so many adventure-y like things. That was cool. But I think the most exciting thing was, the reason I showed up the first time was to show up and attend Rage. I don't know if that's still a thing there, but it's essentially the South African version of E3, which is, I was beside myself because, I mean, being a Canadian, what did I know? I had no idea what to expect, what South Africa was like. I mean, I only knew what I knew from reading or from movies, because I've never been there before. And I was so excited to find out that I could travel so far and feel like I fit in so well, especially when I was surrounded by all these avid gamers that were just so into games. And like, I don't know, it just, I don't know why I was surprised by it, because I shouldn't have been, but it's just because you guys are so far away that I had no idea. And it was nice to see such a healthy fervor for just gaming, and that you could pack an entire essentially convention center with people that were diehard gamers that were interested to come and check out what's coming down the pipe as far as new games are concerned. And I remember getting up on stage and talking about, it was Avatar at the time. I was on a press tour, and I was getting up on stage and talking about this game and doing the demo, and people were so excited. So yeah, I don't know. I've never been so far away from home yet still feel so at home. as I did in South
And
Africa.
in
It was
this
awesome.
new world where COVID has kind of collapsed borders to such an
Mhm.
extent, I mean,
Yeah.
work from wherever.
Yeah. Yep.
I mean, I'm wondering how feasible it would be for a South African gamer to work on a North American, game project.
I think you're going to see that if there's one good thing that came from this whole thing, and it seems almost like, and I don't want to like I have to be careful when I say this because it's so much bad has come from this. It's completely destroyed industries. It's destroyed lives. It's destroyed families. It's not good. It's not, no matter where you live in the world, it's not been good. But the silver lining from a very gamer like developing perspective is that you're right, that these borders have been destroyed, and I don't think there's any going back, because companies have, like, working from home is something that a lot of people have been wanting to be able to do, because production's difficult. It's very difficult on a family, because when you're going through shipping a game or you're trying to meet a deadline, the hours can become longer, and it can require a lot of people. And so having that extra flexibility of being able to find a way of being able to still be with your family a little bit, maybe just have lunch with them because you're working from home, can make the difference between destroying a family when you're shipping a game sometimes and like keeping it together. So people have been wanting and craving this idea of flexibility working from home, at least like part-time, maybe go in the office 1 or 2 days out of the week, but like be able to have that flexibility to work from home other days of the week has been something that people wanted for a long time. And now it's there because no one has a choice.
Yeah.
And what it's done is it's could have destroyed the argument that it can't be done by a lot of companies that for some reason just didn't want to allow that to happen. And so now that we've passed through that barrier, now you're having a lot of companies coming right away saying, just so everybody knows, this is now a new thing now. If you want to continue working at, like, I think Twitter was one of the first companies that started to do this publicly, just say, hey, working from home is a thing now, no matter what happens with the pandemic, for 2 reasons: because it makes sense, because it makes people happy, and B, who knows how long the pandemic's going to last, who knows when the next one's going to happen. So like, life needs to evolve. We need to find a way of living on this planet with these viruses and still be able to work, and still be able to, like, keep doing the things that we love to do. And so I think that is, for the first time, really an interesting scenario for people that are a bit more remote, like South Africa being, so far outside of the typical sort of jurisdiction of where the meccas of game development are. Now suddenly there's nothing stopping you other than just your own skills and your own enthusiasm to get that job.
And networks, Brent. I mean, I think network
Yeah,
is the key.
I agree. But networks are also online, right? There are a lot of online organizations and platforms where you just need to kind of show up and be a member and be a participant. Yeah, be engaged, because that's where it's all happening. It doesn't matter. Even if you live here, that's probably where you're going to spend most of your time networking anyways. Yeah, sure, you're going to go to the events. You might be like close enough to go in to attend GDC in San Francisco. Okay, great. That's a great place to network for sure. But like, honestly, just that's once a year. So it's not really enough. What you need to do is find a way of engaging yourself on a regular basis. And there's lots of places online to do that.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for your great questions, and also for joining us today on your Saturday afternoon. Where I'm at, it's raining and terrible.
Here too.
So
small world.
So I'm hoping that you guys up in Joburg are, because I'm actually down in the Western Cape, had a really great day today, and Brent ended it off nicely, gave you some really interesting insights, interesting goals and career options for you that, us at Brighter Futures, we are more than happy to explore other questions that you've got as you kind of percolate over what Brent has been sharing. So by all means, you're welcome to pop us an email, send us a WhatsApp with any questions that you've got that come out of this. If game development is something that you're interested in, please do inquire, because we've got a current game design course that's running right now. We've got another one coming out over the holidays that we'll be doing for the schools that are 𝐷𝐷𝐷𝐷 4-term schools. We'll be doing another program then. And then for those that are finishing the game design course now on Unreal, we will have a next step for you. So we want to be able to help you build a portfolio of games and get you more and more advanced and exposing you to more and more of the kind of innovative technologies that are out there in the gaming world. So that, yeah, one day you could join Brent on some of his
Yeah.
projects, hopefully.
Come play. Yeah, and just really, just to double down on that, if you have a specific question you think I could answer, just send it to Joe. She can then send it to me, and I can get that answer back to you, no problem.
Excellent, guys. Well, thanks, everyone. We will be speaking to you all soon. Brent, we'll chat.
Thank you.
Over
Yeah,
and out.
absolutely. Cheers. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.